When Seventh Generation was started, which was in 1988, there really was not, corporate responsibility in the way we think about it today did not really exist. Um, and there were a handful of people who sort of did hang out together through the social venture network, and it was Anita Roddick and Ben Cohen and Gary Hirschberg, and sort of all of the people that many of whom went on to be relatively successful in the coming decades. And we honestly had no idea what we were doing. We wanted to do good things through business, but none of the practices that we now almost begin to take for granted, whether it's corporate responsibility reporting or transparency or many of the things that we've come to expect from companies, none of those things existed. So at that point, we made stuff up. We gave away 10% of our profits when companies, and they still do today, give away less than 1% of their profits on average. We had salary caps, so we decided we were going to limit how much the highest paid person was relative to the lowest paid person. And we had a ratio of about 17-1. The average today at large public companies is about 500-1. So we did, we tried to do good stuff, and in many respects, whenever we saw an opportunity to do something good, we sort of went after it. Looking back on that experience today, and really looking back on the world of corporate responsibility, as hard as we tried and as many people as we inspired, my conclusion is that it all didn't add up to much. That the trajectory that we are on from a social perspective and from an environmental perspective has continued to get worse, not better. So we slowed the rate at which things were getting bad, and that sadly just isn't good enough. And it leads to, in some ways, people like Cheryl were instrumental in a change in our thinking that began to look at things in a more systemic fashion. And so rather than doing this good thing over here and this good thing over there, we started to understand the system that we were part of. And we came to the conclusion that every one of the products that we were selling were what I would consider designed to be less bad, not good. And so that's problematic. Now, it's better to be, a little bad than a lot bad, but the world is not going to be the kind of place we want it to be if what we do is make products that are just a little bit less bad than other people's products. And I teach a course at NYU that looks at the relationship between economics and sustainability, and it really focuses on the way in which we've sort of designed economic, political, business systems that produce this unfortunate result. You can take me to task on any of these things in a few minutes when I finish. But it is not the case that we don't have the capability, we're not smart enough, we can't innovate enough to come up with solutions to the problems that we're facing. I mean, I do think that we have that capability, but one of the things that I find is that most people don't have a understanding of the system in which they're operating in. And I'll give you an example. I mean, so we were selling toilet paper that was made of recycled fiber. And the reality is that the U.S. government gives over $1 billion of subsidies away to the logging and timber industry, and artificially lowers the price of virgin fiber. So, the system that we're operating in is a system that actually financially incentivizes us to support and buy, in many cases, the wrong products by making them cheaper, when companies that actually try to internalize their costs and take responsibility for their impacts end up having to sell products that are more expensive. So I guess I'm deeply concerned about how much we have created this complex system that produces, in many cases, unintended negative consequences. So, optimistically, I believe that it's possible to design businesses and products within that sort of dysfunctional system that actually do produce good products, that produce products. And when I say good, I'm sort of saying when you add up all of the impacts of a product or a service, that the net total of all of them are good rather than less bad. And good would probably be defined as being regenerative, so that they make things systemically better than they were beforehand. When I have been gone from Seventh Generation for about 2 years now, and honestly, when I left, I thought I would never start another business again. I felt like I've started 3 businesses, I've sort of had it, and after a while, my wife, among other people, sort of came to the conclusion that that's sort of all I knew how to do, and I wasn't really going to be happy doing anything else, so I might as well just go do it again. Although hopefully not working as many hours a week as I used to work. That's my goal, is to start a company working 30 hours a week. We'll see if I can accomplish that. So what I was trying to find. Let me also say, some of the other challenges with Seventh Generation went beyond the products. One of the things that we often don't pay a lot of attention to are things like corporate governance. And corporate governance is a really, really important thing, because it's the rules by which the company sort of plays the game. And most lawyers will sort of give you a standard set of corporate governance guidelines that allow you to operate the way most companies operate when you don't really want to operate that way. So part of the failings at Seventh Generation were things that we didn't know enough to do differently. And so, when I and I think another thing that became clear to me that was very important was to have not just a workplace where the workers owned the business, or at least owned a significant part of the business, because to me, you can't have a responsible, sustainable business if all you have is employees, because what you're doing is you're basically using the company as a vehicle to concentrate wealth into the hands of a few people that are the owners. So very much believe in worker-employee ownership in whatever form it takes. But also, we had failed to create a real democratic workplace. So theoretically, everyone could stand up and say whatever they wanted to say, but yet the employees didn't elect members of the staff to the board of directors, which is really where the power in most companies lie. So one of the other things that I wanted to do was not just create an environment where people owned part of the business, but where we all actually had a more democratic workplace where people were empowered to participate in a more democratic decision-making system. Then of course, amongst, and I would also say who you take money from is one of the most important decisions that you will make. It is far easier to let an employee go if you made a mistake than it is to let an investor go. Once you take someone's money and that money is in your pocket, it's really hard to get rid of them. And money has an agenda, and you really need to understand the agenda that comes with the money that you receive. And my experience is that that most of the money that goes into businesses has an agenda that has nothing to do with sustainability, has nothing to do with equity and justice, has really only to do with making more money. And, there are no shortage of people who say they're running socially responsible venture funds. And they're socially responsible as long as being socially responsible doesn't interfere with making as much money as you can make. There were a lot of lessons we learned. And so, when I was thinking from a product perspective about, and I actually wrote this thing up, like, does the world really need another business? I mean, is that what the world needs now, is someone else to create a business to sell more stuff? And, the truth is, I'm not sure it does need another business, but what I do think it needs is it needs people to continue to evolve the model of how business functions so that people hopefully will see that model and say, hey, as good as Seventh Generation was and as good as Stonyfield Yogurt or Patagonia are, there is a possibility to create a business that functions on even a higher, more just and more regenerative level than any of the things that we've seen so far. And so what was most compelling to me about starting another business was getting that model better and having a model that other people could learn from and having a model that perhaps would inspire other people to do business differently. Then I said to myself, well, I also want a product that addresses every problem that the world faces. A product that in and of itself will deal with climate change, will deal with population, will deal with hunger, will deal with, you name it. And the product that I came up with was condoms. And, it's not like at my age, I'm not a big consumer of condoms, and I had no interest in having a condom company. But that product, when you look at the whole supply chain, all the way back to the plantations, there is no rubber plantation in the world, bar one or two, that don't have terrible labor conditions that use child labor. And one of the problems with the condom industry is that you have this relatively good product, but it's made by kids and it's made with all kinds of toxic chemicals. So there was also really an opportunity to sort of improve the way the product and the industry functioned. But what I liked was that I could deal with these issues of fair trade, in addition to having a product that was organic. And there was no question that it seemed like it was going to be a lot more fun than selling toilet paper and tampons. People don't laugh and don't smile when you talk about tampons and toilet paper. Every time I have a conversation with someone about condoms, I've never had a conversation where someone didn't end up smiling or laughing as the conversation evolved. And we also decided that we were going to focus on selling condoms to women, not to men, because we believe that in general, women care much more about these issues than men do. Not to say anything bad about men, and I'm a man, but we believe that there's an easier path to the market. And today, women buy 40% of all the condoms sold in the United States. But I believe that there is incredible power and influence in business that can be used for good or for bad. So I think business is really important, and I believe for the sake of the world and future generations, we've got to find a way of getting it right. Does anyone get it right? I think people get parts of it right. I think part of the challenge is that because we don't think in a holistic, systemic way, we decide that we're going to focus on one part of the equation. So you have someone like Patagonia, and it's interesting, I don't know whether you read about their sort of newest focus, that they've sort of gone beyond thinking about their products, and they are beginning to think more sustainably about business as a whole and the economy as a whole. And how do they have a positive influence on an economy that is consuming at a rate that is just going to wipe everything out, and they're contributing to that. As great as Patagonia is making the world a more impoverished, unsustainable place day by day because the negative impact of their products is much greater than the positive impact of their products. Now, they recognize that. So it's unusual. You don't find a lot of companies and you don't find a lot of CEOs who are willing to stand up and say, our company is so far from being what we hope and what it should be. So, I think they are inspirational. And what's interesting is they've managed to be inspirational over a relatively long period of time, and they keep raising the bar on themselves. So, I love the ad they did in the New York Times that said, don't buy this jacket, buy a used Patagonia jacket instead of buying a new one. Organic Valley is really an interesting company because it is a large cooperative. I mean, they're getting close to $1 billion of sales. They're owned by thousands of family farmers. They exist in business for one purpose, which is to help those family farmers thrive and survive. They're not in business to make money for themselves. They make a marginal profit. All the money that they make goes back to those family farms. And it's unusual to see such a successful brand in the marketplace, and they've been growing consistently for a couple of decades, with such a radical ownership structure, which is a cooperative. And sometimes being a cooperative is a painful thing to be because you have to make decisions that make thousands of people happy, and it's hard enough to get two people to agree on one thing, let alone thousands of people to agree on one thing. So I think, we definitely have things we can learn from business. And, yes, business does terrible things. But I think it's dangerous to walk away and say, well, I'm going to go do something else and not worry about that, because those businesses will have an impact on your life. They'll affect the air you breathe, they affect the water you drink, they affect the food you're going to consume. So there's no way to escape the influence of these companies. There's been obviously recently this whole new generation of this focus on social entrepreneurship, which is sometimes a hard thing to define. Some people think it should be not-for-profit. Some people think, well, it's fine to be profitable. Some people think they should make a limited profit. My hope for this new generation of social entrepreneurs is they approach what they're doing understanding the systems implications of what they do, not just getting obsessed about a particular product that solves a particular problem, because we often know that the product may solve a problem very effectively, but it might create two problems at the same time. So
what are you going to do with a new company to be good and not less bad, and to create greater good in the world than harm?
Yeah, so one of it is working with the growers and the plantations, which are in India, to really show. I mean, what people don't know is condoms are so profitable. I mean, they're one of the most profitable things you can sell. They have 80-85% gross margins. There's no excuse to save a penny to have children working in the field. I mean, some crops are not that profitable, and so you can sort of understand why they need to reduce their labor costs. This is a case where there's no need to do that. So part of it is trying to get the industry to become fair trade. It's happened reasonably successfully in the coffee industry, but no one thinks about the rubber, the latex industry. Then you have an unfortunate manufacturing process that basically operates with the notion that, as long as there's small amounts of carcinogens in the product that won't kill you, it's okay for them to be there. So there's a whole supply chain initiative. And then obviously a lot of the focus, and one of the reasons why I like a business that can be so profitable, is that you can then give a lot of money away. And our thinking in the moment is to focus on women in America that don't have access to family planning. There's a lot of attention outside the United States, but there's, you know, many, many, many millions of women in this country who don't have access to family planning and can't afford it. I mean, we have a country where, you know, 1 out of 6 people rely on food stamps, where we have 25 million homeless children. We have a huge issue, which is morally hard to accept in this country, and so our focus is going to be on trying to help take care of those women who really, I mean, people like Planned Parenthood are trying to reach them, but Planned Parenthood doesn't come close to reaching all the women that need their help.
So, how are you going to get condoms to these women who don't have access?
Well, the answer is I don't entirely know. We have relied on some research that Planned Parenthood did about how they don't reach, who they don't reach, and what could be done for them to reach those women. One of the fortunate things about condoms is that they're also inexpensive. So unlike food and other medical supplies, you know, you can make a condom for as little as 1 to 2 cents. So it's interesting that people don't have something that actually is so inexpensive. So part of it is distribution, but equally big part is education, particularly in outside the United States. But you know, much of the research has been that if you just give something away, people place no value on it. So a lot of the research says that it's better to sell the condom for 5 cents than it is to just give it away. And we work with an interesting organization called Population Media Council, and they have pioneered, particularly in the developing world, serial radio dramas, where they will hire in Kenya or in India the most famous actors and actresses to model behavior. So they make it cool to go to the health clinic and get an AIDS test. And the truth is, if the people you most look up to and you think are cool and you respect are doing and modeling that behavior, you are way more likely to do the same thing. But you know, I mean, I should say, I'm entering into doing this business knowing little about what it is I would like to know about it. So most of the time I spend my day learning about stuff that I don't know. And luckily I like to learn. But you know, I mean, my day is spent usually trying to understand all the things I don't understand, and I expect that will continue. 20 years ago, I trademarked the name Rainforest Rubbers because I had this idea of going out into the Brazilian rainforest, tapping the trees, and making condoms out of them, and I never did it. And so it took 20 years for that idea to sort of gestate. But I make it sound much more rational and logical than it actually is from a process perspective. The other contender was being a professional shell collector. So, I mean, I, I think, I think it's defensible, and I think that it will live up to its promise. But I didn't like go through some huge analytical mapping process of comparing hundreds of different businesses, because I don't work that way. You know, my hope is that we can use this product not just to address issues of sexuality and, you know, but to actually connect the dots between this teeny little item, because it does link to almost everything that's going on in the world. And it touches almost everything that we care about and that's important to us. And so if we can change the relationship to using that product to one in which it connects people to thinking about all those things and lets people feel like the choice they've made is a positive choice for all the things they care about, you know, the system is the way it is because we have designed every aspect of this system, parts that we don't think about. We don't think about how the accounting profession creates a mandate for companies to externalize their costs onto the environment, onto the human race. I mean, you know, we take it for granted the way financial statements are designed. And those financial statements look at half of the things they should look at, but they've designed to not look at the other half. So the challenge is a significant one. But you know, when you look at the Nordic countries, for example, there's a great story in this week's Economist about the four Nordic economies. And, you know, they practice a quasi form of capitalism. I mean, it definitely has a much more socialistic influence than we have in the United States, but it is capitalism. And I think that the problem isn't capitalism. The problem is how we practice capitalism. And a big part of that problem is, and you know, and I'm not sure why it is this way, but it, you know, one of the things that I think is the most problematic is that we have created a culture in America that accepts things that it's hard for me to imagine they accept. You know, there's a wonderful, or we shouldn't say wonderful, but well done, but very depressing show on 60 Minutes in the last year about homeless children in Florida and what it was like to be one of the 25 million kids in America who live in a tent, who live under a bridge, who live in a car. And, you know, how can we be a civilized society when we have 25 million homeless children? So I also worry about the shape and state of our mind and our thinking that allows us to almost not see the impact of our culture in the country we live in, and allows us to continue to perpetuate that. You know, as bad as the systems are, you know, we have to get up every morning, and I look in the mirror and I say, shit, I'm looking at a big part of the problem. You know, I think I'm doing what I can do, but we're not doing enough. We have accepted a situation that should be unacceptable. Misguided subsidies, and it's a gigantic problem. I mean, it's very closely linked to the problem of money in politics. There was recently an analysis that someone did that said that for every $1 that companies and individuals spend on lobbying, they get an average return of $77. Because if that $1 changes the rules in their favor, they get a huge return. And so you have this smaller and smaller group of people spending more and more money lobbying, changing the rules of the game, and distorting it in pretty catastrophic ways. I mean, you know, why is it that General Electric pays, you know, an average corporate tax of 4% or less? You know, it's because they have 1,000 people working for them just on tax issues and just working to change the tax rules in ways that minimize their taxes. Now, the problem is if you're running a corner store or you're running a small business, you're going to pay the maximum tax you can pay because you don't have anybody lobbying to change the rules in your favor. So it's you know, the challenge is that there's so many important parts. The subsidies are a critical part. The subsidies in the food industry basically allow bad, unhealthy food to be cheap and good, healthy food to be expensive. So, and again, as I don't want to say that we can't fix these things. I think that you know, where we need the most innovation is to think about new ways in which we can address these challenges, how to build new movements. I mean, you know, Occupy Wall Street was great, but we need that, times 100, and we need it to be going on all the time, and we need 10 other examples of that. Yes?
Just a question, and whether it's your time at Seventh Generation or afterwards, a lot of effort has been spent in trying to market, to sell the customer on a sustainable product or a socially fairly made product. And some big enterprises will say, well, we tried this, it didn't work, and they may have designed it wrong. But how much of the issue is education necessarily? And if simply having, let's say you have this great product, you have this campaign around it, and people don't respond, is that, where do we look when we think about innovating? It's more than just having a great ad campaign.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say I don't think it's true that these big companies don't think these green natural products are of interest. I mean, if you look at 100 natural product green companies that have been successful, 99 out of 100 have been sold to big companies. So when you go to Whole Foods and when you go to a natural food store, most of what's on the shelf is owned by, General Mills and Kellogg's, and, whether it's Stonyfield that's owned by Danone, or whether it's Honest Tea that's owned by Coca-Cola, or whether it's, Odwalla that's also owned by Coca-Cola. I mean, these big companies have bought up all these mission values related brands because they actually think long term that's the way you're going to have to succeed with consumers. You can build a relationship with consumers based around the values of the business that is far more effective than promotions and coupons and anything else, and far more resilient to keep them from switching brands. So the strategy works. Now, that again isn't going to solve all the challenges that we face. Arguably the biggest positive impact that Seventh Generation had as a company was influencing other businesses. We started a trend around organic cotton, for example, back 20 years ago, that influenced big companies to move in that direction. When we first started to make full ingredient disclosure on our cleaning products, the industry wouldn't do it. They said these were trade secrets, we can't reveal the ingredients. And the truth was they didn't want to reveal the ingredients because if they told people that they were buying products with carcinogenic, toxic chemicals in them, people wouldn't buy them. So now that has become a standard. S.C. Johnson said they would do it, and now it's recommended by the Industry Trade Association for all cleaning products companies to be transparent and disclose their ingredients. So that, again, when I talk about being a model, it is raising the bar on the way business is done in your industry and other industries where I think you can have the greatest impact. I sort of thought about, well, what do I want to make and what am I going to be comfortable with? And I knew what the lowest paid person was making, and I did the multiplication and I said, I'm comfortable limiting myself to that number. My wife didn't like it, and my family probably didn't like it, but it was random. I mean, in the Mondragon Co-op, do people know the Mondragon Co-op in the Basque region of Spain? 125 companies with 100,000 employees doing $30 billion of business. They have a salary cap of 4 to 1. A $30 billion business with a salary cap of 4 to 1. So, and actually what we found was that salary cap sometimes kept us from hiring the wrong people. If you go out into the marketplace and you want someone that's going to make that much more money than other people, sometimes they're not culturally who you want to hire. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about your corporate governance plans for rainforest rubbers? Is with that in mind the kind of tension between having total kind of cooperative business model where there are hundreds of voices versus the kind of democratic governance and decision making at a high level that doesn't necessarily involve everyone in the discussion?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I am doing is over certain issues of the company's values and responsible business practices, they will not ever be able to be changed without my approval. So it doesn't matter whether I own 5% of the company or 50% of the company. I will have what's called a supermajority voting stock that blocks anyone from changing those things. As I said, another important thing is having the board made up of some people that are elected by the employees, because that really changes the dynamics. I mean, things are said in boardrooms that boards would be horrified if anybody knew about. Those discussions, I believe, are very different if an employee is there and people know that that discussion will be shared with the rest of the company potentially. We will be a B corporation. I mean, I think that B corporations don't solve all the problems, but from an institutional structural perspective, they do some positive things relative to disclosure. And disclosure is an important thing. I mean, we disclosed many things at Seventh Generation, but there were a lot of things we didn't disclose. We didn't disclose how much of the product you bought was actually spent on making the product. I mean, that's one of the big secrets in the CPG industry. If you went and bought a $100 bottle of perfume and you knew that the bottle of perfume only cost $2, you would say, my God, why are they charging me $100 for something that costs $2 or less? And you found out that the bottle that the perfume was in cost way more than the perfume that was actually in the bottle. So I want to take transparency to another level. Disclose what we're spending on marketing, disclose what we're spending on promotion, so that when you buy a condom, you can actually see, well, this much went to the product, this much went to the packaging. Actually, the foil packaging on a condom costs more money than the condom costs. Which is also why it's ridiculous to not use fair trade labor, because it's such a small part. So taking transparency to a whole nother level. There were a lot of things that we wanted to do that we didn't do at Seventh Generation around dialogue with our customers and making their voices a real significant part of who we are and what we were doing. A lot of companies, as soon as someone says something they don't like on their Facebook page, take that comment down before too many people can read it. I don't think there are a lot of companies that are really in a real dialogue with their customers and make those customers really a part of who the brand is and what the brand becomes. But again, please understand that I don't have all the answers to these things. A lot of it you make up as you go along, and it doesn't work out and you try something different. I mean, one of the things that people really, it's important, I think, to understand is the fact that you don't know how to do something is no reason not to do it. You can teach yourself almost anything. And so many people don't do and don't follow their dreams because they think, well, I don't know how to do this, and the truth is, if you're sitting in this room, you're more than bright enough to do anything that you can possibly imagine doing. And the only challenge you face is getting over your fear of not being able to do it and potentially failing. But even if you fail, it's not the end of the world. I've had no shortage of failures in my life. Accountability. I mean, there's little accountability in part because there's not great transparency. These issues are incredibly complicated. And the reality is that even when we know about things that shouldn't be, it doesn't necessarily affect our behavior. Now that's, to me, that's the more challenging part of the equation. How do we get more people to be responsible for their own decisions, to be responsible for the money they put their bank in, for the clothing they wear, for where they go on vacation? I mean, to me, that's a huge disconnect, because even though there's a lack of information, the information itself doesn't necessarily change behavior.
Do you believe in entrepreneurship, the idea that you can change a company from within? So it's not just your consumers that are pressuring the company, but employees can really make that change, especially within these big CPG companies.
Yeah, Yes, within limits. I think that if a company isn't inclined to move in that direction, it's really hard for people to influence that. If you've got a CEO and a board of directors that thinks this is all bullshit and we shouldn't pay attention, you're going to make very, very small incremental change. But if you've got a company that is at least open to the possibility, then the challenge is, can you make a good enough business case to get people to pay attention to? And most people don't know how to make the business case within their company. They don't understand that, making a more environmental product isn't just good for the environment, but it's good for employee retention. It reduces employee turnover. J&J and Unilever have huge employee wellness programs. For every dollar they invest in their employee wellness program, it saves them $3 to $6. So, but we don't, and particularly business school students aren't taught how to make this argument to companies. So, but yeah, I think you can make that change. It's very different. Look, Ben & Jerry's has been owned by Unilever for a long time. They had little influence on the direction Unilever was going until Unilever got a new CEO who had a very different attitude than the old CEO. Now, all of a sudden, Ben & Jerry's is of great interest to Unilever, much more so than it was when the old CEO was there.
It seems a little bit top-down in the way at Unilever with Paul Hollender.
Hey, I'll take that if that's what it takes, I would say that Unilever today is on the leading edge of corporate responsibility for large companies, because one of the things they're doing, which I find fascinating, is they've redefined their responsibility, not just to the products they sell and make and dispose of, but how their consumers use their products. So they define their responsibility as the CO2 that is emitted when people use their products in the shower and make hot water. So they have a challenge. The only way they can reduce their footprint is to get people to take shorter showers. And now they're in the business of education and behavior change, not just changing the formula of their products. And so I think that's a big challenge to take on. And they created the problem. They convinced people to do things that weren't good for the environment. Now they've got to try to convince them to behave very differently. Yeah.
How much do you think corporate social responsibility influences buying behavior?
So first, look, Seventh Generation was a very responsible company that sold laundry detergent that didn't get your clothes clean at twice the price as Tide. That wasn't a good combination.
Right.
It didn't matter how responsible we are, we weren't gonna sell a lot of stuff. So you got to get the product right. There's no question about that. If you get the product right and you're responsible, then your challenge is, well, how do you communicate that effectively? Because lots of companies do good things that they don't particularly communicate very well. I do believe that if you are a brand that helps your customers be and become who they want to be. So I help you be the good person that you want to be by using my product. You're not going to switch to another brand because you get a 25-cent coupon to do that, because I've become part of who you are. I've become part of who you want to be, part of your journey to the person that you're becoming. And that's a very different relationship than most brands establish with their consumers. Yes?
A thought occurred to me that in the way that nonprofits and charities operate now, with sort of the charity navigator that tells you the percentage of money that goes directly to the cause versus their overhead. I wonder if that's a kind of, that's a very clear and transparent sort of model.
The Good Guide does that.
Yeah.
The Good Guide does that too.
Yeah.
The Good Guide is the best, simplest tool. Does everybody know the Good Guide? So you can download the Good Guide software to your phone. You can go into the supermarket, take a picture of the barcode, and it will give you back a rating of that product from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective, from a transparency perspective. It's a great way to help you make a good decision. They've made it very simple. What they failed to do, the fact that not everyone in this room knows about it and they've been around for a decade, is a huge marketing failure. I mean, how is it possible that there's so many people who want the help to make better decisions when they buy products that don't know that someone spent, all this time and millions of dollars developing it? So marketing is important. Whatever you call it, communications, marketing. I mean, I'm a big believer in marketing because one of the challenges that a lot of entrepreneurs face is sometimes they create things that they like that no one else needs, or things that they like that no one else is willing to pay for. And sometimes they create brilliant things that they don't know how to tell anyone about. And part of the solution is learn what you're good at what you're doing, and then find other people to complement your capabilities, because you're not going to be able to do everything well. I think there's a sort of general knowledge that things are not working the way they need to work. There are going to be problems in the long term, whether they're social or environmental, and we have to rethink our role relative to those challenges. And different companies react differently. There's Paul Pullman, who's willing to say, I'm going to grow the company and cut my footprint in half, even though I have no idea how to do it. It needs to be done. And there's other companies that will say, well, symbolically, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but, let's not really change our business model. I mean, it is, part of my, if you were to say, what is going to happen that is going to create the greatest change in corporate America, I'm afraid it's going to be more disasters. I'm afraid that it's going to be, more tsunamis and more nuclear plants blowing up. I mean, unfortunately, we're so unconscious to the severity of the problems we're facing and the impacts of our own behavior and our business behavior. It's going to take some big jolts to get us to make those fundamental systemic changes. And again, to go back to the importance of models, when things all of a sudden go really wrong, we're going to need models of what to do instead. And it's why it's so important that we create enough businesses in banking and in all different areas, so we can say, gee, if we had only done that, it wouldn't be so bad. There's a wonderful bank in the Netherlands called Triodos. Do people know the Triodos Bank? So Triodos is in about 7 or 8 European countries. They're tens of billions of dollars in size. They have banks all over the place. They only invest in 3 things. They invest in alternative energy, sustainable agriculture, and microenterprise. Their performance is better over the last 10 years than virtually any bank anywhere in the world, because the things they invested in didn't end up in the trouble that most banks did. And so all of a sudden, banks take notice when all of a sudden this European bank ends up outperforming almost every bank anywhere in the world. But that wouldn't happen if we didn't have that model to show that other possibility, and we weren't able to compare our behavior to someone else's behavior. To my knowledge, there is very little research about what makes a successful social enterprise. What is it about? And I would consider 7th Generation a social enterprise in Stonyfield, but what is it that has made some of those companies very successful, and what is it that has made others fail? Not much is known about that. You have people like me that run around and tell you what they think, but that's not the same as doing research. I think the other question is, for those social enterprises that have lived the longest, that have lived, not just 10 or 20 years, but lived 30 or 40 years, why have those companies been able to endure over a long period of time with a very different mission and focus? I think there also needs to be work done in terms of trying to define what social enterprise and social entrepreneurship is. I mean, everybody, it's like corporate responsibility. you are that if you decide to call yourself that. There's no rules, there's no guidelines, and that creates a real sloppy mess, and it ends up destroying the word. Sustainability today has really no meaning because everybody uses it in such a different fashion that it doesn't stand for anything. So I do think, the good thing about B Corp is that they have created some guidelines that they say this is a more responsible business practice. And you either sign up for those guidelines or you don't. Yes?
So related to that, because you said you were going to be a B Corp within your company, but you also said that you don't think that B Corps are the full answer. So do you think that B Corps are missing something really major as a
Yeah, they don't deal with employee ownership, for example. You don't get points, or there's no requirement to move in that way. And I would say you can't be a responsible business if the ownership isn't dispersed amongst the people that are actually creating and running the business. So that's, they have some big blind spots like that, but it's more good than it is bad. So, I support it, but I support it and encourage it to get better at the same time. I think their transparency requirements could go further. I was talking about disclosure about what does the product actually cost and how much is spent. Those are the dirty little secrets that no business really wants to reveal. But I think consumers are entitled to know. So 2 more questions. You had your hand. Oh, got 3. You 3 that make a tic-tac, make a tic-tac-toe.
Some of your biggest mistakes were at 7th Generation?
Well, my biggest mistake was taking money for the wrong people and letting them take control of the company, which led to having them fire me because they decided I was a socialist crazy man.
They didn't bring up the elephant in the room.
So, that was a big mistake. I once quantified all my mistakes into the dollar value of them. Some of my biggest mistakes are hiring the wrong people. Hiring the wrong person can just really screw up your culture, and it's just a poisoning mistake. And I think one of the mistakes we made at 7th Generation was we were so obsessed with growing quickly that we thought the solution is keep hiring people who knew all the things that we didn't know, rather than investing in the people we had. I really like, I just read the book by the guy who started Zappos, and I hate business books. This is like the only business book I read the whole thing of in 10 years. And he focuses his business strategy on 3 things. He says customer service is the best type of marketing you can possibly do. If you're really great at customer service, you need less marketing. He focuses incredibly on training and development, spends a huge amount of money and a lot of time on training and development. And the third is the culture of the company. And I read that and I thought, that sounds right. I'm gonna follow his lead.
If you talked about changing systems. If you have a system changing idea, how do you get buy-in from the people who might be better off if the system changed, but also have a vested interest in the system the way it is?
It starts with a lot of education. And, sometimes I think, if every first grader learned systems thinking, they just wouldn't do all the crazy stuff that we all do because they would see the connections to their behavior in a way that we're really blind to. So I think to get that buy-in, you really have to change the culture. And you have to create a culture, and you have to create an awareness that really thinks differently. As Cheryl and I have a close friend that just passed away, and his title at 7th Generation was the Director of Corporate Consciousness. Not corporate responsibility, corporate consciousness. And we had such a person because you can't really do corporate responsibility without corporate consciousness. You need the consciousness, the awareness, the thinking capability to see things that most of us don't see in order to think about corporate responsibility in a way that it really needs to be thought about.